Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. At this very moment, the Senate is in the middle of a final vote to pass a bill that will end the government shutdown, raise the debt ceiling, and prevent a government default. Following the vote, we expect Senate leadership to speak the House of Representatives. Plans to vote on the Senate bill later tonight. Joining me here is Bill Burton, who worked in the White House for a good many years, was also in the Obama campaign. What is your reaction to the fact that we are now in the ending on a whimper stage of this process?
Well, it's great for the country that we're finally opening up the government, that we're not going to default on our debt. And, you know, frankly, I don't understand why we had to even get to this point in the celebration about getting here. But I will say that I have some concerns as a Democrat that this isn't all good for the Democratic Party. I think there's some reasons for us to be cautious about what happens next year. I think, and this is counter-conventional wisdom, but I actually think that Boehner may be stronger, because if he has the support of his conference in a way that he didn't before, that means that he probably has a little more power. Here was what was remarkable to me. Right now you're seeing the Senate is going through a roll call vote. This is the second vote they've taken tonight. And the first vote was a procedural vote because, of course, you have to clear cloture even when everyone knows that it's a fait accompli. The cloture vote happened just before you joined us on air, and now there is an actual vote on the resolution that is being offered. It's about 35 pages long. It includes a nice little bit of pork for a Army Corps project that happens to be in Kentucky, where the good Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is from. I want to go now to Congressman Jack Kingston, who's a Republican from Georgia. Congressman, this could have happened 2 weeks ago. What the heck was all this for?
Well, yes and no. People, need to exhibit their beliefs and have the opportunity to debate, which is what we've been able to do in the last 2 weeks. And I think you can, from a pessimistic standpoint, say you Republicans did not get anything out of it. But on the other side, I think it was important to us to reestablish our brand as being against Obamacare. And from what we've seen so far, Obamacare is not going to be a winner. It has not decreased the cost of medicine.
Congressman, do you think anyone going into this was confused about the Republican stance on Obamacare?
You would be surprised. I'm telling you, sometimes our base thinks that we haven't driven the point enough, even though we've had something like 40 different votes to defund it in one form or the other. We still get complaints that we're not doing anything to defund Obamacare.
Congressman, I want to stop you right there, because this is pretty remarkable to me, what you've just told me. There's an estimate that this 2-week shutdown has cost about $25 billion in lost economic activity. That's not $25 billion to the Treasury. That cost is probably somewhere around $2 billion. So $25 billion in GDP growth and economic activity has been lit on fire for all intents and purposes. And you're telling me the reason for that, the plus side, that's the cost. The plus side was that Republicans got to, quote, exhibit their beliefs and also convince their base that they're really against Obamacare.
Well, let me say this. Obamacare was part of this debate. The big picture of it was that we have shown that we really are very concerned about the national debt, which, as you know, is 100% of the GDP. For every dollar we spend, 42 cents is borrowed. And I think that's something worth fighting over. The spending gap, the levels between the Senate and the House right now, is a $90 billion difference.
Congressman, I'm sorry, but the continuing resolution that was on the table 2 weeks ago before you guys shut down the government, that would have continued funding at the sequester level. That was never a debate. The baseline number was never up for debate. That passed the Senate and would have passed the House. The number that you're getting in terms of the deficit is the same number.
Well, actually, that's not really the case. I know that that's what the Democrats said, that we've agreed on the number. There was a truce on the number, and the truce on the number was only for as long as the CR. Our number is $967 billion, and the Senate number is $1,058 billion.
And you're getting $986.
Well, we don't know that we are. Right now, that's not decided, because the sequestration, to quote Democrat phraseology, is the law of the land, and so it may go to the 967.
Wait a second.
But we're not certain. But I want to say this. With the deficit being 100% of the GDP, don't you think these issues are worth us fighting over? And I think we would agree that they do. And the sad part about all the shutdown frenzy is the focus has been on the shutdown and the short-term inconveniences and problems with the shutdown, with the government closing, but there's no focus on what the real problem is. And the real problem is that America's going broke, and we've got to do something about that. And Democrats and Republicans together should be losing sleep over what our deficit is beginning to look like.
Deficit has been cut in half over the past year. Congressional Budget Office is predicting that debt to GDP will stabilize at 70% if we do nothing different than the current trajectory. Congressman Jack Kingston, thank you so much for your time. Joining me now is Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat from Ohio. Do you understand why we shut down the government for 2+ weeks?
Well, I just heard Jack say that there was a short-term inconvenience of a shutdown. It was an inconvenience for the 97% of NASA employees in Cleveland that got furloughed, and not to mention Head Start and all the services that the government provided. I understand they tried something that surely didn't work. I mean, the House resisted at every chance to do this bipartisanly. The Senate did it bipartisanly from the beginning. The House could have passed it before the shutdown, could have passed it a week after the shutdown, and reopened the government if they were willing to try to do it bipartisanly. They even tried last night to jam it through a one-party rule, and it's that kind of ideological fervor that so offends people, Chris, in this country, as you know, instead of trying to work things through and do it right the first time.
Bill Burton said at the top of the show that he was concerned a little bit about this deal from the Democrats' perspective, and one of the issues is what I was just talking to Congressman Kingston about, which is the number the baseline budget is set by. And we should be clear here, we are talking about the discretionary budget, not the social insurance programs that are funded through alternate means. Do you worry that this has now locked in this baseline sequestration number that is very close to the Ryan budget, and that handicaps Democrats' negotiation when we go run this whole experiment again leading up to the expiration of this continuing resolution?
I don't think it. I mean, it's in place until January when. But sequestration was already in place, and sequestration is going to get more severe and worse for the country and worse for the kinds of values that most of us hold dear in January. But this gives the opportunity to actually negotiate it. But you also heard a number of far-right conservative members of the House and Senate say that, well, I'd be willing to reopen the government if you go after, they say, entitlements, but what they mean are cuts to Social Security and Medicare, more shift of cost to Medicare beneficiaries, more cuts in the cost of living to Social Security, and all the other things they want to do. But in the next 6 weeks, you're going to see more and more clearly that the Ryan budget and the Republican efforts are going after the social insurance, which they really don't like, the social insurance you mentioned, Medicare, Social Security, the two pillars that have really protected so many millions, tens of millions of seniors and their families in this country. Medicare for 40+ years, Social Security for 3/4 of a century.
Senator, let me just cut in there, because I'm being told that while the vote is still open, there are now enough votes to pass the resolution as expected, which means this is very likely to come out of the Senate and head over to the House tonight, which means we are on the glide path towards a resolution and denouement to this entire ridiculous spectacle. Speaking of which, in your career as a politician, have you ever seen a political strategy fail as humiliatingly and abjectly as this one has?
Probably not, but I might add to that, Chris, that the real issue, and that is, did they learn anything from it? And might they be tempted to do it again? Because I was watching the 1-minute speeches from the House of Representatives this afternoon or this morning, whenever they were on. 1 minute after another, they alternate parties, and there was no contrition and little lesson to be learned, it seemed, from so many of these mostly Southern, mostly far-right conservative members far-right members who have districts that look and sound and apparently think like they do. And are they going to put aside what they're thinking in South Carolina and Texas and instead look at the nation's interest? And so far they haven't done that. They just didn't have enough votes to continue this little mission they have into the next week.
That is absolutely the operative question going forward, because as we learned tonight, while this immediate crisis is over, we are set up for another budget battle in January. Senator Sherrod Brown from the great state of Ohio, thank you so much. Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Kristen Welker. Kristen, what are you hearing from the White House? Is this going to be wrapped up this evening?
Well, it certainly looks that way at this hour. I think the White House is feeling pretty optimistic. The administration just released this, a statement of administration policy, essentially saying that they strongly support the Senate bill that is being passed right now. And then it also says the administration urges the Congress to act swiftly to pass the bill in order to protect the full faith and credit of the United States and end the government shutdown. So they're essentially calling on the House to follow suit. As you just pointed out, the bill is expected to pass through the Senate. I think that the White House likes its chances right now. House Speaker John Boehner earlier today essentially capitulated. He said, we fought the good fight. We just didn't win. It's an indication that he believes he does have enough votes to get this through the House. But of course, Chris, this isn't over until it's over, and it's not over yet. You've noticed that President Obama has sort of been in the background over the past several days. We haven't really seen him, heard from him. That's in part because he's wanted to let this political process play itself out without getting into the middle of it, without muddying the process, allowing the political pressure to sort of build up on Republicans. White House officials thought that they would blink. That is essentially what has happened. The White House pretty much got what they wanted out of this deal. The government will reopen. The debt ceiling will be raised, and only sort of a small concession on Obamacare, which has to do with income verification.
Kristen, let me cut in there because I believe the final vote tally may be being read on the floor of the Senate right now. Pat Leahy, who is occupying the chair's seat, and I believe we do actually have a vote. Take a listen.
Without objection, the motion is agreed to. Under the previous order,